Hello, my name is Erich Hunter, and I teach people about pendulum healing. It's a form of energy healing using pendulums. Now, I have a course that's just come out called End of Life Healing, and I wanted to share some information from this course because I really think it's good for all healers to know about this information, at least have some awareness of it. Because as a healer, eventually you're going to encounter situations where people are either approaching the end of life or they have reached the end of life. And it's very important to know what to do in these scenarios. So there are three basic scenarios that you will encounter. If you do healing work for a long enough time, you are eventually going to encounter end of life healing scenarios. So the first scenario is the crisis situation where someone's life is, they're in trouble. They're in a state of crisis. Like they could be in a car accident. They could all of a sudden, come down with a fatal illness or something, where very quickly the person's life is in peril, or the being, could be an animal too. It's in peril, and you do healing work to try to support that being so that they pull back from death and return to a state of health or stay alive. And that role is traditionally played by the modern medical establishment. But if you do healing work, eventually you may find yourself in that role, because we all have family members, friends, clients who have these critical life or death situations that occur, and they need healing help. So a lot of the healing work for that type of end-of-life healing involves, with a pendulum, it involves doing energetically supporting the people who are assisting, like the medical personnel or the ambulance personnel or whoever. Also doing healing work to support whatever treatment or care is being given. So with like pendulums, a lot of the work you can do with pendulum healing is to actually make traditional healing methods like Western medicine more effective. And then also you can do energetic healing work to support the person energetically and also spiritually. So there's a lot that can be done in that role. And you never know when you're going to be called upon to do this. Because, like I said, things happen all the time. And eventually, as a healer, you may just find yourself in a situation in public. Someone could be having a heart attack, things can be going on. And while, of course, you want to, support them in whatever ways you can, which may be calling 911 or doing CPR or whatever. But if you are in a role where you're not actively involved with trying to save the person's life, then you can use healing work, pendulum, or even your fingers, just spinning your fingers around will serve as a proxy for that. And I explain all that in my teachings. But whatever healing method you use, you can assist, as without actually being directly involved. And you can do a lot to support the person, make the medical procedures run more smoothly, help the ambulance get to the hospital more quickly. There's a lot you can do with this kind of energy work. And then energetically support the person, provide help to them. Okay, the other scenario which you may encounter as a healer, it's not as likely to happen, but it definitely could happen. A lot of healers encounter this while working with pets. And pets are living beings, so they fall into this kind of work. But sometimes it happens with people too, is when a being is transitioning between life and death. So there's a lot going on there. As a healer, though, you can assist that being by providing energetic support of unconditional love, a calming energy. You can also raise the consciousness of that whole experience so that the being who's transitioning can get into a higher state of consciousness while they're transitioning. And also you can hold space and raise the consciousness of the other beings, the people who are witnessing this and who are affected by the loss of this individual. So there's a lot that can be done there. Now, the other phase of end-of-life healing, which is kind of odd to think about because it seems like it's an oxymoron, is to do healing for the being after they've already passed. And so I need to explain this a little bit. So let's back up here. So there are two basic viewpoints that people have. And one is that when you die, it's just total annihilation or complete oblivion. And the other one is that there's some form of an afterlife. So those are the two basic hypotheses about what happens to a being after death. And at first glance, you would say, okay, well, the scientific view must be the complete annihilation or the complete oblivion. But ironically, that viewpoint has no support scientifically. It's just based on a lot of assumptions by people who are skeptics or nihilists. Ironically, the viewpoint or the hypothesis that has actual scientific data supporting it, medical journal articles, really interesting scientific research, peer-reviewed, not just woo-woo stuff, this is from mainstream medicine and science, is that consciousness in some form can survive, at least in certain circumstances, the death of the body. So there are lots of different lines of evidence for this. So just very briefly, like there's this past life research done on children where these children they just spontaneously recall things that seem odd. They should not be able to know them, and they don't have any gain or benefit from this. There are cases of the NDEs where a person is clinically dead, yet later they can recount events that occurred while they were clinically dead, which should be impossible if consciousness can't exist outside of the body. There is the evidence from organ transplants, like heart transplants, where the person who gets the organ all of a sudden has a new awareness and knowledge of things from the previous person they got the organ from, even though they know nothing about that person, and these organs are donated anonymously. They do have medical records, but the person getting it doesn't know any of this. And all of a sudden these people start taking on all these traits of the person. They have memories from the person they got the organ from and lots of things like that. So there are other lines of evidence too. I'm just scratching the surface on this. I have an entire course on this subject, but there is evidence of an afterlife. And this is, of course, the view that's taken by most spiritual traditions. Now, another aspect, so when a being passes, there is some evidence that there is consciousness of some kind that can survive. And the interesting thing is that, like in the past life research that's been done, and then a lot of the other lines of evidence, what's often remembered is the trauma or the bad things that happen to the person. So what you can do as a healer is that you can do healing on those traumas. So I teach people how to do this with a pendulum. I have an emotional healing protocol, and I have various other healing techniques with the pendulum that you could use to heal the consciousness of the deceased individual. You may have your own healing methods that you use, and you can use any kind of healing method you want. I teach the pendulum, but you can apply this to any kind of healing method. So you can work with the consciousness of the being. And this is really important because, like, for those of you interested in the paranormal, what's a ghost? It's a being who's trapped at a very low level of consciousness and can't escape. And traditionally in, many different cultures, there's this idea of the psychopomp, or the guide for the dead, or the guide for the soul. So, in various traditions, like there's an angel or a being who takes the soul, and in shamanism, the shaman helps the soul. So we can do that kind of work. So like with the pendulum, you can raise the consciousness of the soul of the deceased being who's passed and help it to move on. So another interesting thing that you can do after a person has died, or a being has died, is that you can do healing on their life in the past. And this, interestingly, also has some scientific support in the form of retrocausal action. So there are these really interesting studies done where people would take a test, and then they would immediately after the test, they give them like a test of words, and then they immediately after the test, they wouldn't show them the results of their test, but immediately after the test, they would take one half of the words that they had gotten on the test, and then they would give the people a chance to study them after taking the test. And then the interesting thing is that when they looked at these tests, the people who had this experience did better on those words than people who didn't have the opportunity to look at the words after the test. So it implied that by taking an action in the present, you can affect the past. And this is called retrocausal effect. So it's like it's cause and effect, but it's going backwards in time. So what you can do is, like with the pendulum healing, or maybe with other healing methods you may know, you can go back in time and work on aspects, healing aspects of that person's life in the past that were unresolved. You could do emotional healings, physical healings, remove traumas, various things. And while you can't change like what happened in their life, you can alter their healing trajectory, because what the past life research shows is that what is often passed on from one life to another, not the good stuff, it's the traumas. So you can do that healing work to free that consciousness from carrying the burden of those traumas over into another life. And also, that healing work done on the person in the past will affect positively any descendants or living connections that that person had. So by healing that person, you are going back in time, doing the healing on that person, and then you are healing every lineage that descended from that person, so that those people will not get whatever it is that was passed on through that person's consciousness or their energy lineage. So this is really cool work. Well, I could go on and on about this topic. I'm really fascinated by it. But I hope that this was interesting and that you got something out of it. And I really want you, if you haven't done so already, I really want you to think about end-of-life healing work. Because like I said before, as a healer and just as a human being, you are going to encounter situations where other beings need your help. And while you do everything you can to help them in the normal physical way that's conventional, as a healer, you have the ability to do paranormal things, to do things that are beyond normal, that, you know, well, we know they're normal, but most people don't. Then you can profoundly help other beings in this really important, either keeping them alive or in the transition from one life to another. And this is very profound and very important work that you can take on. And like I said, you probably will take on at some point. So it's good to know something about it. Anyway, post your questions and comments below, and I thank you for watching my video.